Hey guys, it's your boy Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. You think your fitness tracker knows your metabolism? Think again. On this exciting episode of the Peak Physique Podcast, I'm going to break down why the Cunningham Equation is king in bodybuilding. It's the most accurate way to calculate true TDEE for lean, muscular athletes. If you coach athletes and you're still using age-based or guessing macros, this one's for you. Let's talk about lean mass, real metabolism, and smarter prep math. We'll see you guys on this episode.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to another exciting episode of the NASM Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. And today I've got an exciting episode. I've been wanting to drop this one for quite some time on why the Cunningham Equation reigns supreme in bodybuilding. So if you guys are familiar with, calculating nutrition and RMR and total daily energy expenditure, we're going to break down the differences of why age doesn't determine your caloric needs, but your lean body mass does. So we're going to get away from those empirical values and focus on lean body mass and direct measures. Let's kick it off by defining what is the Cunningham equation and how does it stack up compared to, more common, I'll say it's more common when we're talking just basic nutrition for the general population, equations like the Mifflin St or Harris-Benedict. Right? These are really those age-based equations, and I'll lay those out for you in just a moment here. But again, those do not factor in the amount of lean body mass or skeletal muscle. So I'm going to define the Cunningham equation first. If we look at that, the math behind it is RMR or Resting Metabolic Rate, which is really the foundation when we're calculating your nutritional or caloric intake needs, right? So it's RMR equals 500 plus 22 times lean body mass in kilograms. And that lean body mass, just to give you guys a little bit more context there, is basically everything in your body that's not fat, right? So we're talking skeletal muscle, we're talking bone mass, we're talking water, etc. Now, if we look at the Mifflin St. Jeor, we're going to take the female version because there's a difference between the male and the female. Again, we have empirical values that are used in each of those equations. So the female Mifflin St. Jeor equation would be RMR equals 10 times your weight in kilograms plus 6.25 times your height in centimeters minus 5 times your age minus 161. That is a really long equation. And if you look back through the equation, nowhere in there does it account for lean body mass, right? And you'd have similar results if you look at the Harris-Benedict or the male version of Cunningham. Now, when we look at those age-based formulas, the problem with these is they can really tend to under or overestimate the caloric needs. And we're going to get into a very specific case example in just a moment here. But just kind of high level, if you think about it, the logic behind it is very easy to follow, right? If we've got a 120-pound female physique athlete, let's say it's a bikini competitor, and we've got two of them. One is 10% body fat at 120 pounds. And one is 25% body fat at 120 pounds. So if we use those age-based formulas, if these girls are the same age, it's going to say that their caloric needs are going to be the exact same if they're cutting into a show, or maybe they're reversing out and they're trying to build muscle, right? So we need them at a surplus. As opposed to taking something that factors in that amount of lean body mass, like the Cunningham equation, this is going to make a very big difference in how much we feed this particular athlete based on their muscle mass and the fact that metabolism is functioning at a much higher rate, right? That's that metabolic building phase that we talk about so often in bodybuilding. So with that, I'd love to break down an example comparison. We're going to use that same athlete. Let's take a 5'5" so that would be your height, right? 120-pound female bikini athlete being 10 to 12% body fat. So pretty average, right? For a 5'5" athlete, you could be extremely competitive with those metrics. Now, if we took that as an example, we have to convert everything back into centimeters and kilograms for this equation. So let's start out By defining that, the height would convert to 165 centimeters, weight would be 54.4 kilogram, and then skeletal muscle mass, if you're using an in-body or a DEXA scan, for instance, they have that percentage, right? When we look at the percentile of skeletal muscle relative to an average person that age and height, this individual would be roughly 115% on an in-body, for example, which tells me that their lean body mass would be approximately 49 kilograms or 108 pounds. Now, when we plug all these numbers in, we're going to use both scenarios. Let's start with the Cunningham equation first. So we're calculating RMR, and we're using that formula we mentioned earlier. In this example, it would be 500 plus 22 times 49, and that's going to equal 500 plus 1,078. That equals 1,578 kcals per day, right? That's what the Cunningham equation factoring in muscle would equate to. So, 15 to 1,600 calorie a day is her resting metabolic rate. Now, if we plug the same variables into the Mifflin St. Jeor age-based equation, and I'm not going to read the full equation out because, again, it's a very long equation, but you guys are more than welcome to follow along, plug those numbers in, and it's going to net out 1,264 kcals per day, right? Now, to get to TDEE, I'll just throw a footnote in there for you guys that maybe are unfamiliar, right? So we're calculating the foundation number, which is RMR, resting metabolic rate. To get to her actual caloric needs, we then have to estimate the total daily energy expenditure. And to get there, we normally take RMR times an activity factor. And that activity factor is estimated based on their lifestyle. Are they a construction worker? Are they a nurse? Are they sedentary, sitting at a desk for 9 hours a day? And also, in addition to this, how much NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, how much cardio, how much, daily step count, things like this all factor in. So, you have to make a reasonable estimate, and the range is typically 1.2 to 2.0 for those multipliers. That brings you to TDEE, and that's really the benchmark of what we would call like maintenance calories based on their lifestyle. And we would start to talk about, surplus or deficit in calories from there. Now, if you think back, these two versions of the calculation, the Cunningham coming up with 1,578 cals versus 1,264 cals in an age-based equation, that's about 314 calorie difference per day. Now think about that, right? This could severely impact performance or muscle retention. So over the course of a week, for example, that 314 calories adds up to around 2,200 calorie difference, which can impact your weight loss or weight gain anywhere from 0.75 to 1 pound per week, right? So there's a significant difference in the two approaches here. And we want to make sure that for physique athletes, we have the most precise nutrition possible. Now, here's the one caveat that I'll throw into all this, because it almost sounds too good to be true, right? When we think about it, you got to ask yourself, well, who in the world would use anything other than the Cunningham equation when calculating a physique athlete's caloric needs? And the reality is we don't always have access, at least not initially, to some of these tools that we're talking about for direct measure, like a DEXA scan or an in-body scan. So when you're first working with somebody, and maybe they're not an athlete when they start, right? Maybe they're just a general weight loss client. Maybe there's someone who is actually starting from very skinny and trying to build muscle, so they have less than 100% skeletal muscle mass, right? In the beginning, if you don't have access to these tools, it's okay. Use the age-based ones. It's going to give you a good benchmark. The more experienced you get as a coach, you'll start to be able to kind of predict where people are at, right? You can look at an athlete that's maybe starting prep for the first time and kind of get a good estimate of how much muscle they carry. And based on experience, even without direct measure, you'll be able to make a more appropriate assumption on their caloric needs. But whenever we can measure it and we have access, this could be a caliper pinch test to measure body fat. It could be a in-body, a DEXA scan, a bod pod, underwater weighing. Any of these solutions that get you to a number on lean body mass will work great. Something you can plug in and feel a little bit more confident when you're first calculating their nutritional needs. Now, again, why this matters, let's go a little bit deeper, right? Specifically for bodybuilders, lean body mass is a better prediction of metabolic needs. And the reason for that is because your muscle mass has much higher activity when it comes to burning calories than body fat, right? It's a lot more dense tissue. Obviously, it weighs more than body fat, and the caloric need definitely shifts. One of the most commonly asked questions that we get is how much protein should I eat? And you'll hear those numbers all over the place, from 0.82 grams per kilogram of body weight, 1 gram per pound of body weight. You'll hear numbers all over the board for this. However, when you think about it, we should really be basing it off of how much lean body mass we actually carry, right? We want to make sure that we support muscle protein synthesis and growth, but not overdo it to the point where we're straining our kidneys or just storing excess body fat because we have too much protein, right? So this is a better way to predict it. And then you can start to get down into a more refined plan on your macro split and protein breakout. Again, the reason that it matters is once we have this data, we can make a lot more intelligent, informed decisions about the nutrition. And this is going to help us optimize muscle gain, fat loss phases, recovery phases, right? If we're under nutrition and we're lacking the ability to recover, that can, prevent us from getting back in the gym as frequently as we want, or we might be approaching overreach, or burnout. We might have chronic soreness or be too inflamed because we're just not getting the nutrition. So in the beginning, if you have to, start with an age-based equation and then adjust, right? Over those first few weeks, you might have to just monitor baselines. Let's say you calculate using the Mifflin St Jeor, and you've got them maybe a couple hundred calories more than they should be, right? Maybe the calculator spit out more than what they actually have, and they don't have a lot of muscle. You might be overfeeding them. And what you would see if they're in a weight loss phase, you would see the weight either staying stagnant and flat, or it might be trending up when it's supposed to be trending down. So you can still use those as a benchmark, observe, the performance and trends over time, and then start to adjust the calories from there. So if that's the case in that scenario, I would either bump cardio a little bit. You might have to look at more thermogenesis, maybe adding some L-carnitine, CLA, B complex, some of the uppers that will help stimulate converting fat into energy, or you might have to just adjust the diet down and pull some calories out. So that's one way that you could establish baseline without using Cunningham equation. But again, the ultimate goal is get to a point where you get that direct measure. And this is a continuum. You don't get it once, right? You got to remember throughout a prep, let's say we're going into a bulk phase and we start with 100 pounds of lean body mass, but our goal for the next 3 to 6 months is to build muscle. If that athlete puts on 10 pounds of muscle, then that means we need to continuously update and refine our approach, right? So that Cunningham equation is going to factor in that now higher amount of muscle and tell you how much nutrition that individual needs. So you have to make sure that you continuously update and refine it. It's not something that you'll set once and then continue to use the entire prep. But that's really what it comes down to. When we think about advanced coaching, it requires the ability to predict physique outcomes with precision and nutrition, right? And energy balance. All these things have to be predictable. We definitely don't want to kind of just guesstimate. It's almost like playing darts with your eyes closed, right? We want to make sure that we're precise with our nutrition and we can predict the outcome, especially when we're peaking out for competition. And again, takeaway there is just remembering that metabolism and muscle is very active, especially compared to body fat. With that, let's talk about some practical implementation, right? How do we actually use this in practice? We kind of scratched the surface there, talking about maybe starting with Mifflin St or Harris-Benedict age-based formulas. But when possible, I encourage you guys to push your clients to get a DEXA. If you're fortunate enough, maybe you've got an InBody at your gym. If not, you can actually go to inbodyus.com/ I want to say it's testing locator. If you just Google it, you'll find it. And you can actually type in your zip code and find an InBody scanner in your area. So that's one thing I highly encourage. And if all else fails, you don't have access to either of these technologies, go old school, bust out the calipers, preferably the steel ones if you got them, and let's work backwards into a lean body mass number from there. Now, from there, again, as a coach, we're going to adjust the intake as frequently as weekly, sometimes daily, right? But definitely weekly or biweekly based on biofeedback, based on measurements, based on progress photos, based on energy and how an athlete's feeling. when we do our check-ins, not only are they accountability check-ins, but these are check-ins where we're looking at all of this data collectively, and then we're trying to figure out what do we need to do with our calories and our nutrition to make sure we move the needle and execute on the plan, right? And we might see great progress for the first few weeks, but as their amount of lean body mass and their total body mass changes, they might plateau, or we start moving the needle the wrong way. This is the importance of updating and adjusting weekly based on that biofeedback. And another good indicator would be performance too, right? If, again, their training is starting to suffer, they're having trouble with their recovery, maybe they're chronically sore for 2, 3, 4 days of DOMs after a hard training session, or they're noticing muscle weakness. They hit legs really hard early in the week, but by end of week, they're very sore and their lifts are starting to decline, right? These can be indicators that maybe their nutrition is inadequate. Maybe their training is too hard. Maybe the timing of the type of workouts needs to be spaced more appropriately to allow for more recovery. And it could be micronutrition and supplementation to support recovery, right? So just taking into consideration performance, again, body composition and aesthetics, all of these things are going to be far more valuable when you're prepping athletes than just looking at scale weight alone, or when we're calculating dietary needs. All of those are far more valuable than looking at age alone. Side note there too is to always monitor biomarkers for signs of overreach and burnout. Can't stress this enough. You guys have heard me talk about mineral balancing and HTMA protocols. When we look at a lot of the biomarkers, we're looking at things that give us good representation and feedback on things like adrenal health, central nervous system or CNS health, leptin and insulin signaling. And some of the easy things to monitor are going to be overnight resting heart rate and HRV. And not just, one snapshot in time, but we're really looking at zooming out a little bit and looking at the trends over time. So if, let's say we start on Monday, right? We've got a really aggressive prep. We're doing high amounts of input. So high intense training, high intense cardio. Maybe you're at the lower end of the spectrum on your caloric intake and your nutrition. And we want to look at those biomarkers, right? If we see HRV starting to trend down, which is not good, and we start to see resting heart rate trending up, right? And then by day 3, day 4, we're really starting to approach overreach. Those could be good signs that, regardless of where the calories calculate out using either equation, it might just be time for a calorie bump or a refeed, right? I like to structure high carb refeeds every 3rd or 4th day in that scenario. Again, that's completely separate from where we calculate the total calories. That's just based on biomarkers to keep an athlete progressing and avoid approaching overreach. So just some extra thoughts I wanted to, kind of weave into there, because all of this stuff matters, right? It's not just calories in, calories out. You guys will hear that a lot when you're first starting out, that, the macros don't necessarily matter. Timing doesn't matter as much. It's mostly calories in, calories out. That might be true for general weight loss or general, weight management, we'll say. But when we're talking specific physique outcomes, that is certainly not the case, right? We want to get as precise as we can. And again, really focus on using the right tools to measure the amount of lean body mass, and then the right equations to predict our actual nutritional needs. Just some final thoughts there, because I want to recap this and make sure that you guys have some good takeaways and you can go out there and put this into practice. Is, again, lean body mass, or LBM, is more effective than using age alone for physique athletes. Use the Cunningham Equation and lean body mass based tools like our InBody, our DEXA, our caliper, our pinch test, right? To help dial in precision nutrition as you're peaking out your athletes. And then another thing that I'd like to make sure we remind our followers is that, don't forget, we've got a lot of these tools online. If you go to NASM.org, for example, we've got a lot of nutrition and energy balance calculators and tools that you guys can use. And for all of you physique athletes, prep coaches, fitness enthusiasts, don't forget, go to NPC News Online. We've got our physique prep and pro bundle there. I want to say it's still 50% off, but when you get in there, you actually get a lot of these programming templates and tools that will help you guys get more familiar with a lot of these equations and formulas, and really make your lives a lot easier, right? If you can download a tool, you don't have to do all this stuff by hand. My background was in engineering, so I don't mind doing it by hand sometimes, but it's all about productivity and efficiency. And if you can, have access to these things, make your lives a little easier, and make sure that you make smarter decisions when calculating nutrition for your athletes. Guys, that's all I've got today. If you have additional questions or you just want to give us a follow, be sure to catch me online. You can email me questions directly at trainingbydre@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and YouTube at @AndreAdams_official or Team Adams_prep. And you can reach me online for more info at AndreAdamsofficial.com or TeamAdamsPrep.com. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something new. I encourage you, if you learned anything from this episode, please share it with at least one friend. And we look forward to seeing you on the next exciting episode of the Peak Physique Podcast.